So a year or so ago, I needed to get a bunch of blood work done. I had been hired for a yoga teaching job at a local hospital, and they required several immunizations and tests as part of the onboarding process. So I scheduled an appointment with my doctor's office to get the work done. Downstairs at the phlebotomist's office, I watched as he began to insert the needle into my arm. I've never been good at giving blood. I twice attempted to donate blood when I was in high school. Each time I would climb up onto that bed-like chair and watch as they inserted the needle into my arm. I would watch my blood drain from my body into that bag. And you might not know this, but there is actually a limit to how much time you can take to fill up that bag. And each time I was never even able to fill up half of the bag, probably closer to a fourth of the bag at most. And I was told that there's just something about my body that doesn't allow what is in it to easily come out fast enough in order for me to give it to anybody else. And even after being told this the first time, even after nearly passing out in the process, I still went back again to try again the second time. And that time I was told the same lesson as I had learned the first time. Theresa, this just isn't for you. So I waited a couple of years, and in my fourth job after I graduated from college, the office that I was working in was having a blood drive. So I signed up and I decided to try again. That time I didn't even make it onto that bed-like chair, and even though I had no intention of telling them the truth about me, I wasn't going to tell them that I already knew that there's something about my physical body that does not allow me to easily share my fluids with anybody else. But when they asked me if I had ever had sex with an African, I said yes. What country? They said. I glanced at the ceiling, not entirely sure if I wanted to tell them this truth about me, and trying to remember all of the nations of penis that I had allowed to enter my body. I answered honestly, Uganda, Ivory Coast, and Nigeria. I would not be allowed to donate blood because, as it turns out, there is a strain of HIV in Nigeria that is so resistant to treatment that it's just too risky to take blood from anybody who has had sex with a Nigerian who has been in Nigeria since 1980. I was born in 1983, as was my ex-boyfriend, and my ex-boyfriend, like my father, was born and raised in Nigeria. So half of my blood and half of who I am comes from there. They gave me a t-shirt for my trouble. It said, "Kiss me, I'm a blood donor." I took it and winced. The first guy who ever cheated on me did it after deciding to kiss a girl who was wearing a pin that said, "Kiss me, it's my birthday." And then he did more than kiss her. So there I am, downstairs at the phlebotomist's office, getting this blood work done for my yoga teaching gig, watching as the phlebotomist puts the needle into my arm, and he says, "Wow." "Oh," I say, kind of surprised at the sound of apology that came out in the tone of my voice. "Oh, I've heard that my veins are really difficult to find, and also that my blood comes out very slowly." "Yeah, they were," he said, "and it is, but it's not that. It's that your skin is tough. Like, physically, you have thick skin, and it was difficult to get the needle inside of you." "Oh," I said, slightly more disappointed this time. "I guess that makes sense." I am a 35-year-old single woman, and since staying with that first guy who had cheated on me for a total of 4.5 years, I have never been in any relationship that has lasted longer than 9 months, and I have tried. I have tried Yahoo Personals because that is how long I have been trying. I have tried Cupid, Match.com, eHarmony, Tinder, Bumble, Hinge, The League, you name it, and I have probably tried it. I have met men at bars, at coffee shops, at events, out in the course of living my regular life. I have tried, and I have been hurt. I've been hurt more times than I can count, more times than I can continue to carry, more times than I care to remember. I have been hurt, and that hurt lives within me, and like my blood, I am slow to let it out, slow to share it with anybody else. Not long ago, I met a guy who told me that he was worried about the prospect of dating me because if it didn't work out, it might make us both too sad, and he wasn't sure that that was a risk that he was willing to take. I told him that every relationship I have ever been in has failed, and that hasn't stopped me from trying. Sure, it feels like I'm being stabbed repeatedly, but who doesn't enjoy a good stabbing now and again, am I right? He laughed, we laughed, we decided to try. His name was Benjamin. We met on Tinder, which is a dating app that uses a flame as its symbol, I have to imagine, because it is aware of how similar its experience is to the experience of a dumpster fire. On our second day of chatting, Benjamin told me that he was going to make soup. I told him that I love soup, but I don't know how to make it for myself. He asked me what my favorite soup was. He went to the grocery store, bought the ingredients, made my favorite soup, and then invited me over for dinner. We sat at his kitchen table for 5 hours in a rainstorm, eating soup and bread and drinking red wine, laughing and talking and playing bananagrams. We never left the table. We never even touched each other. And then after that dinner, he started to send me text messages with pictures of himself in bed. But they were like the nice kind, like with him all snuggled up under the covers with his comforter that he would call his cloud pulled all the way up underneath his chin. And he would tell me about how he liked to stay nice and cozy in his bed with his comforter that he called the cloud. 3 hours into our second date, I suggested that we get going because it was getting late. We were running out of time. We both had to get up and get dressed and get to work in the morning. He suggested that we take a look at the late night food menu. As it turns out, that menu contained a chili dog, and as it turns out, Benjamin and I both had this rule that if a menu has a hot dog on it, it's a must to order it. It was one of the many random sort of cute little things that we had in common with each other. We stayed at that restaurant for maybe another hour or two. I don't totally remember because I had lost track of time again. And then finally we decided to leave. He held my hand and walked me to my car. And then he kissed me. And it was the kind of kiss that I fear I will never forget. It was strong and clear, and it was soft and gentle. And he pulled away for a moment. He sighed and said that kissing me felt amazing. Then he pulled back in, tugged onto my belt, pulling my body in closer to him as though me standing right up against him wasn't close enough. And he told me later that he just felt like he couldn't get close enough to me. We stood on the street kissing for at least an hour, and I was wearing heels and my feet hurt, but I could not feel them. A day or so later, we got lunch, and then he left for a work trip. 2 days into his work trip, he texted and told me that he had been offered a job in Seattle. He was going to leave. I had met a man whose kisses made me feel like I was floating, and he was going to leave. He asked me how I felt about it, so I told him. He didn't respond for 3 days. When he finally did respond after I had had a few drinks and sent him a "how dare you ghost me, you piece of shit" text message, he was all feelings and he was all apologies and he was all fear. That was when he told me that he wasn't sure that he was willing to take the risk of dating me because it might just make us too sad when he left. He said all the things, like I don't even need to say the things that he said out loud here because we all know what he said. He said what needed to be said, and I believed him. I told him that I wasn't sure if I could trust how he would handle my feelings as this progressed, and I wasn't sure if he was the type of person who made decisions based off of feelings or based off of logic, and I wasn't sure if I could trust his logic. But, I told him, I was willing to try. And he said that he was willing to try, so we decided to try. He wanted to meet my friends. I spent a night in his bed having orgasms and floating on his cloud. It was like I was cliff diving. It was like that blissful, scary feeling when you're not sure if this is falling or flying. And there he was, like with his arms gripping, ready to catch me. His fingertips were pulling into my waist, his arms braced around my thighs, his hands holding my hands as I jumped cliff after cliff after cliff. He met my friends. He came to a story slam, actually, and he listened to me tell a story about who I am. And then he took a picture of me as I was performing and he posted it on his Instagram. I woke up that night in the middle of the night in his bed again, and I told him that my brain was telling me that this was a horrible idea, but that I couldn't hear anything in my body telling me to leave. He wrapped his arm around me, pulled me in closer towards him, held my hand, and he said, "Feelings versus logic. I know." We woke up that morning and in his bed again, and he kissed me. That same strong, clear, soft, gentle kiss. He is half Filipino, and now there was another nation of man that I had allowed to enter my body. He brought his mouth between my legs and he kissed and licked and loved me for what felt like a lifetime, and then he brought his mouth up to mine to kiss me. I told him that I wanted to come just one more time, but I knew that it was getting late and that we were running out of time. It was the morning and we both had to get dressed and get going to work. He asked Alexa what time it was. Alexa is like Siri, except I'm pretty sure that she lived in a machine on his mantle. So he asked Alexa what time it was, and then he smiled and brought his mouth between my legs again. I came and started to float on those clouds that surrounded me, and his arms were right there to catch me. After I finished, he looked up at me, smiled, and said, "I can't believe that you were willing to give up just because there might not be enough time." There were 10 days left until he was to leave, and I allowed myself to believe that that was enough time. Once, sort of jokingly, he told me, "Oh yeah, that thing. I knew that thing about you, except I'm not sure if I knew it because you told me or because I heard it in one of your stories." He had actually sought out my stories, searched them online the morning after our first date. He allowed my voice to fill his head through his earbuds on his train ride to work, and then he sheepishly texted me that night to admit it to me. He listened to me tell stories about my sense of self, my formation of who I am. He listened to me tell stories about men who had hurt me because they had disappeared. He texted me, "Fuck those guys." He told me that he was worried that he might one day become one of my stories. 7 days before he was to leave, I texted him and asked him if he wanted to hang out again. He never responded. A day went by, and then another, and another, and another, and he never responded. Maybe he felt like there just wasn't enough time, and so he was willing to give up. Maybe he really was worried about making me too sad by leaving, so he decided to hurt me instead. Or maybe he felt like I had learned this lesson enough times already, and yet here I was willing to try, so he was gonna teach me the lesson again. Maybe the only thing he ever heard me say was that I enjoy a good stabbing now and again. Maybe when he put his penis inside of me, he felt what the phlebotomist had felt, that my veins were difficult to find, that it wasn't so easy to get in me. Maybe he learned what anybody who had ever tried to take my blood before had learned, that there is something about me that makes it not so easy to let out what I have within me. Or maybe he just didn't care. Figured that I would be protected by the toughness of my own skin, figured that I hadn't already given of myself to him. Maybe he just didn't fucking care. It's astonishing what a 35-year-old woman will be asked to endure. That I will be made to feel heard, that I will be made to feel held, that I will be made to feel like it is safe for me to jump again and then nobody will catch me. I will be expected to land on my own 2 feet with nothing but the toughness of my own skin to protect me.